Craig Johnson is a technical solutions architect for Forward Networks, group leader for the Texas chapter of USNUA, and active participant in the AWS Community Builders program. In this conversation, we discuss the power of community, and then we dig into the growth and adoption of digital twins and where they fit in today's tech stack.
Craig, welcome to the show. How's it going?
Hey, excellent, William. How you doing?
Doing well. I can't
Awesome.
complain.
Great to hear.
Yeah. I guess the last time we saw each other was AWS reInvent, right?
That's right. It was right after. That was a long week for me. So actually 2 weeks, because I went to reInvent and then I stayed over the next week for Gartner IOCS. So that was 14 days in Vegas. So I did do some hiking. I went to Hoover Dam. I went to Mount Charleston. So it was a really fun time. But it's that's enough. That's my Vegas card punched, I think, for a good year.
Yeah, if I ever end up spending that much time, I'd like to maybe bring the family along and do some hiking. And there's so much to do around there. It's not like I have to be present the whole time. And,
Exactly. Yeah.
And such. But you're in Irving,
Yes,
Texas,
right outside of Dallas. Yep. So born and raised in this part of town. So I'm one of the few non-transplants that I know. So I grew up in a town called Fort Worth, just about an hour west of here, but no, hadn't left the area ever. So one of the few.
That's awesome. I've been through there a few times, and I was really cool. It's like the balance of big city energy and also like laid back suburbia in a sense, and it's just so close to Dallas and Fort Worth and such. So
yeah, it's really nice. Yeah, I enjoy it.
Awesome. So you're as I just found out a second ago, you're a triple threat. You're, one CCIE was not enough for Craig.
It was not
enough. You had to go out and get 3. So you've got the route switch. We talked about the route switch at some point.
I think so.
In the data center.
I have the data center and I have the redheaded stepchild storage area networking. So this is we're going to switch to fiber channel for this whole podcast. So I'm ready for it. Yeah,
save me.
No, I got mine while I was pretty young. So I got my CCIE in 2001. So a little over 23. Geez, I don't like that number. 23 years. Back when, the study gear was, I had to rent a bunch of old 2500s with serial interfaces, and that was the time. 21 years old, I got that there, and a few years later, I did storage area networking because that was kind of what I was, I actually really enjoyed it. It's actually not as difficult as people think it is. And then a few years later, moved on to data center in my role back at Cisco, which I was there for quite some time too. But
which one was hardest? Which one was caused you the most trouble?
I will definitely the first one. So this was back when the lab was a 2-day exam. So you spent the first day doing all of the basic setup. Like none of the network is set up for you. It's like, here's a bunch of 20. You cable it up. They give you some IP address scheme, but you have to set the entire thing up and draw it out yourself. And after the first day, it's like, okay, you've got all your IP connectivity. Now on day 2, we're going to hit you with Apple Talk and IPX. And I'm really dating myself on this one. And then the fun part for me came because my career has always been in operations and troubleshooting, at least back then. And then they break your network and then you have to fix it. So that part actually was kind of fun, but it's an ordeal back then. So the one day is the later 2 were the 1 day, but the 2-day was probably the hardest one I've ever done.
Sheesh. So looking back, was it all? I mean, I know. So to give you it's kind of funny we're talking about this. Just this last week, I was up until. So we have an unfinished part of our basement. I have a huge 42U rack, and all my stuff that I was using. I mean, I've had this thing forever. This was my CCIE study rack from back in the day, and I've slowly, taken all the. I mean, this thing was full. Slowly, all the gear's been moved out. Some of it was sold on eBay years and years and years ago. The other stuff was given away to other, I had this person I was mentoring a while back, and I didn't need it. And I know he was starting out his career, and like, here you go. This will make it easier. So slowly getting rid of all this gear, and I'm finally getting rid of the rack. So I disassembled the whole thing. I got it out of the room because I couldn't just roll it out of the room. These things are huge.
Yep.
You have to disassemble it to get it out of the house. It's in like a zillion pieces in my basement right now. But it's relief. But it took so long to get this thing out. It's really hard work. I guess the question is, if you had to go back and do it all again, Mr. Triple Threat CCIE, was it worth it?
Absolutely was worth it. At the time, so there wasn't, I envy a lot of people, even in the last decade, being able to do it, because there were very few study materials. There was one or two. There was no emulation. There was no anything resembling anything like that at all. So it was an expensive endeavor, but in terms of one, I just really wanted to do it. It was something that was really interesting to me at the time, and I'd spent all my time working for Avar at the time doing troubleshooting, so super interesting, and obviously it was a career boost at the time. But yeah, you see plenty of people out there that have even more than I do, and you definitely can get the bug with it a little bit, because it's a good challenge to do, and 100% I would, at least at the time, would always recommend people do it. So it was really was you didn't always learn things that were super relevant, like my IPX and SNA troubleshooting skills are probably not what they used to be, but I could still talk. But yeah, but it's funny looking back now that the things that I configured and set up back then are, of course there weren't the overlays, there weren't, MPLS was barely a part of it. The things that you did back then, they never went away. And that's always been the weird thing about networking is I look at every other kind of tower in IT, and there are trends that come and go. This language is popular, this language is not, this structure is popular, not. The same things are still just in networking. We've just layered stuff on top of it. It's like, we'll keep the old stuff, and spanning tree never went away. Basic routing never went away. It's just we just put stuff on top of all of that to make it complicated. So in that way, I don't envy people learning now, is because they have to do all the same stuff I did. They just have to add a whole bunch of stuff on top of it.
This is BGP, TCP/IP. We're still, we're still playing in the same system. Some things have changed in that system a little bit, but the foundations are the same that we're working atop. And I don't know if they're going to change anytime soon. No,
we were saying back then that we're all going to move to IPv6, and that was 20 some odd years ago. So still going, man, still going.
Oh man, yeah. Don't get me started there. So we have a number of, like, you and I, Craig, we have a number of things in common, which is why we probably get along so well. So you're one of the organizers for USNUA TX SNUG, Texas SNUG, and I'm one of the organizers for the Kentucky NUG.
Awesome.
Von Sharp and Joey Jackson. So, and we're also community builders, you and I.
That's true.
So,
yes.
These communities are awesome.
Yeah, I have to thank you for that. So I saw your excellent LinkedIn learning post, and I saw the community builder, and I'm only a 1-year newbie on it, but it's been a great experience, and I'm looking forward to re-upping my membership there. So it's been a great time. So I really appreciate you let me know about that one.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's such a good thing, because I think one of the things, especially in the cloud world, there's so many abstractions that a lot of the intangibles, you forget about the network, you forget about some of the foundational security stuff, and those things kind of get left behind. And, one of the reasons I joined Community Builders, and it's great to have someone like you on the roster as well. And even shout out to I guess the whole Cables to Cloud crew, like Chris Miles, Alex Perkins, and, Tim, they're all community builders as well, too. So we have some hardcore network folks that are in that balancing between networking and cloud. So we're going to go out there and make networking cool again.
Absolutely.
And show people that it's actually a good thing. Like, you want to do it right. You got to make it cool, and you have to make, people have to understand it before they want to accept it and put time into it, and, things like that. And I think these communities are a great way to do that.
Yeah, 100% agree. It's really good to see at the TX NUG, when you see new people coming out, people in college coming out, just starting out, and very, very early on in their career. And I remember when I was that person back then, and to have that people actually coming up and, not wanting, not looking at the cool, okay, I want to do InfoSec and be on the red team or something like that, but actually wanting to do networking. And don't get me wrong, I get it. But yeah, really wanting to get into networking itself and all of the different pieces. It's really good to see that.
Yeah, absolutely. So you like you just mentioned, you had a stint at Cisco for quite a while, and I believe you were at Big Switch Networks as well for a time.
RIP Big Switch. Yes, I was. So I spent many years in operations at a large service provider. It was called Singular back then. It's called something else now.
Oh, Singular Wireless.
Yeah, Singular Wireless.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good deal.
And then, I spent about a decade at Cisco. At that time I was, and that was me purely in a post-sales type support function. And it's you learn so much doing that. I mean, there's one thing to work in operations, which I, absolutely love that I have that background, but then working on customer networks and all of the different problems that they have, and working through that's where I got into data center networking. I was there when the Nexus switches were introduced, and that's where I got into fiber channel and all of the different areas that you can kind of get into with that. And and then after I did my time at Cisco, I wanted to, because I was there for ACI and when that was introduced, and I'd seen some other alternatives, and I was introduced to Big Switch, which was really exciting at the time. And I spent several years there. So I'm at this point, I'm kind of addicted to the startup game. So I don't see that changing to me anytime soon, but it's a lot of fun. Like you get to do a lot of different functions. So I'm really, really pleased with it.
That's awesome. Yeah, you know what? I've told a few people this recently, knock on wood, but I miss being in a data center and actually cabling things. I know that sounds kind of crazy. And I know everybody it's like, oh, we finally don't have to do that anymore. But there's nothing like coming in, we're all so connected. We're always chatting on things. We're always emailing. We're always talking. It's like information overload. And, there's nothing like coming in early one day into the data center on a Saturday. You throw the headphones in. And I remember one day I all day threw the headphones in, listening to an audiobook, maybe some music, and, racking these, we did a 5K refresh. So racking these new 5Ks, getting management, out-of-band management set up on them, the base config. And then at that time, I was actually forward-thinking a little bit, and I was connecting with Ansible to put the rest of the config on.
Nice.
And so I got the balance of hands-on plus engineering design, but there's something about that data center. Oh, the MST cassette. Oh, the patch panel, all the fiber, making everything look pretty. It was just it was like an artist in a canvas almost. And I missed that.
Oh, I agree with that. I definitely think the way is a little better now, but I miss the, having to, doing the racking and stacking and at least setting and then, honestly, it's, figuring out things on the fly, and it's like, oh, this doesn't quite work. And being able to actually do the initial configs and setting all, I had several refreshes way back in the day like that. So there's an element of nostalgia to it. I will admit. So, I mean, there are networks I work on now. Obviously I do a lot of cloud work, and that doesn't really, it's try to tell people it's like, no, there still is a network there. And I'll show you some of the videos, but it's like, I haven't, gosh, it's kind of sad to say, I haven't stepped foot in a real data center, not the building, but the actual data center in a few years. And it makes me a little nostalgic for it. I agree.
Yeah. It's been a little while for me as well. Sometimes I have some pictures. Sometimes I just go back and look at pictures and just kind of reminisce, which is so stupid. But it's I would never want to go back to that life, but I also miss it for there's trade-offs with everything you do. There's trade-offs. So
I don't miss trying to lift 6513 by myself. That was not smart. I mean, that's the stuff you do in your late 20s and 30s. It was like that wasn't smart. Yeah.
Oh, my back can take it.
Yeah.
Oh, now it's like, my back
that's not good.
That.
Yeah. No.
Yeah. Nope. So you've been at Forward Networks for what has it been, 5 years or so?
Almost 5 years.
Right?
It'll be 5 years in this next coming August. So yeah.
I remember when Forward Networks came on the scene in 2014 or something, or maybe even earlier.
So it was in stealth for a while. I came at right around the mid mark. So yeah, it's been around a little over 10 years and been in market probably about 5 or 6 now. So yeah.
That's awesome. And it was started, so wasn't it, this is, I should have actually looked this stuff up, but I remember it was started by like some PhD graduates from like Berkeley or something.
Yeah, from Stanford. It's kind of funny because it comes from the same place that from my previous company, Big Switch, came from. All the open flow, if you remember those sorts of days it was the same group, Nick McEwen's kind of Stanford postgrad group of, how can we reinvent networking in a way that makes a lot more sense. And it's the software is eating the world kind of paradigm that they talked about back then. And yeah, so it's that same sort of group, but spun in a slightly different direction. Yeah.
That's really cool. Really cool. And it's so like, I guess the whole premise behind Forward Networks at this point, it's been I know when I'm in conversations, there's buzzword mayhem everywhere.
Of course.
And this whole concept of what a digital twin is. Can you break down exactly what a digital twin is and how is it being used in the relevant industries?
So the idea of a digital twin is not exactly new in the world. I mean, manufacturing has done it for years. If you see those, those videos where your car, they do a crash test of it, that is completely digital twin before they do any of that. When they're designing, aircraft and they do airfoil and deformation and things like that, that is completely digital twin. The best example I like to use is one that all of us use every day. If you take, a representation of all of the maps that we use, none of us, I mean, I actually still do, but most of us don't have those paper maps in our car anymore. We have a digital twin of those roads. So it's the idea is we're taking something that is a real representation and making a digital version of that and optionally overlaying additional data. Like in terms of the roads, we overlay traffic and accident conditions. So the version of that I would explain in sort of, networking is, is it your Visio map that you have that is somewhere up to date or not and covered in dust, or is it something that is more of a twin of the actual state? I like to differentiate it because people get confused, like, well, is it a source of truth? Not exactly. It's not what your network or not what your thing should be. That is an aspirational state. This is whatever you're twinning is what it actually happens to be.
And it's good to know that. So with the, speaking of like the evolution of this digital twin thing over the years with cloud automation and such, how has it kind of evolved? And, if you take, for instance, Forward Networks, I remember personally, so I evaluated Forward Networks a long time ago. I don't remember what the year was, but at the time I was working for a company where we needed something that had the extra extent into the cloud. And at the time, this was early on, I think, in Forward Networks' journey, but there was no cloud support. It was just on-prem. But now that extends, like you all are completely multi-cloud, like end to end, right?
Yeah, if you think about so the way this kind of started, and I do credit some of the large customers, or not ours, but so if you remember where OpenConfig started, I believe it was AT&T that came up with this idea where tried to force this onto the vendors, like, hey, everyone is doing something. We're pretty much all doing the same things. Like, speeds and feeds change over time, but everyone has the same ASICs. Everyone has the same ribs and fibs. Everyone has the same forwarding methodology. You have a number of tables that you pass through on all of the devices. And going back to the CCIE thing, we were able to now at this point, most vendors offered some virtual versions of all of their products. So it was like, okay, we have some ability to emulate at least small networks to a degree. Why can't we take all of this forwarding logic, not necessarily the actual, the config, because that's whatever, but the logic is the same. Why can't we make that a bit more uniform across all of the vendors so I can really understand, if you think about how networks push in and out, a packet comes into a device, it has a set of headers, it has a set of characteristics. That device will take whatever that packet is and either look up based on what the destination is, set it to an output port and do something to that packet. Maybe add a header, maybe do a MAC rewrite, change the L3 address. It's, whether it's an ACL, routing table, IPv4, IPv6, VX, they're all doing that So the idea is why can't, the original one, this is actually somewhat mirrors what OpenFlow did or tried to do, is why can't we make this a bit more standardized across vendors? As we know, vendors are their own sort of thing. And, some made some efforts of that. Some made some not great efforts on that. But the idea is in this digital twin space is, can't we, well, if the vendors aren't going to do it, we can understand what they're doing, not from the documentation, but actually like what the tables are actually saying, how they're forwarding. Why can't we represent that in a more digital way? And the reason you have to do that is mostly because that emulating networks, which kind of came around late 2000, being able to take these virtual versions, they're extremely half-baked. And I'm sorry to say, it's like you can get a virtual version of a router. It's like, oh, well, it doesn't really do L2, and oh, well, you can't do any VXLAN on it because we didn't include that, and it'll do basic routing and switching, sort of, but oh, and yeah, we offload. There's no data plane really with it, so it's like, okay, well, it's a toy. I mean, so if there was more step up there, absolutely. So you wind up running into that brick wall of like, yeah, I can emulate. That's great for lab study, but trying to really emulate a real network is nigh impossible in my opinion. So long-winded answer, but yeah, the idea is just taking those characteristics of the network that are already baked into these products, and they already output to us. Like if you remember, you're trying to locate an IP address, you log into the switch and you do a show MAC table, then you hop to the next switch, you hop to the next router. It's the same kind of idea. You take that same thing, but just normalizing it into a state that, you don't have to see it across different vendors. And to your point about on the cloud stuff, it's kind of doing the same thing. Like, obviously there's no state tables out there, but they're forwarding things across a construct in their own ways. It's not so uniform like on-prem, but, you're forwarding things across a transit gateway. You're passing through a security group or a network ACL, something like that. So the same constructs are there. You just need to extend the same logic to whatever type of forwarding methodology you use.
It makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I know that... So I hadn't seen an up-to-date demo of Forward Networks in a while, and I know some of it I saw you at. I don't even remember which one. I think it was one of them.
It's AutoCon. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
AutoCon. Yeah.
Yes.
So we were like kind of chilling, and you sort of took me through the, this. So like if I like in the past, like if I wanted to follow the packet, it's like, okay, where am I starting? I go into this device. I'm looking at the forwarding table. I'm looking at the routing table, or maybe it's layer 2. Mm-hmm. Hey, we're switching frames. Looking in this interface, out that interface, this port channel. Okay, now we're routing. We're using a routing protocol, and this is the next hop. And I'm going in and out of these interfaces, in and out of these routing protocols, following things. And it's like, okay, now it's in this platform. Then I log into that UI. I'm poking around, and then I have to go into another UI, and then okay, now I need to go into the cloud console, and next thing I know, I have 1,000 windows open. So that was one thing I thought was really cool about the demo you showed me, was just kind of like that. Follow the packet mentality in one place. You can Forward Networks really easily visualize that from point A to point B in a way that made sense. It gave me the information as a network person that I would want to see that's actually useful and not anything else, which was very cool.
Yeah, and I think, for me, what really kind of sold me on the concept itself, whatever what vendor you use, because there are, Batfish is still out there. There are other vendors in this space. But what really sold me on the concept is when I've been, obviously, I've been at Cisco a long time. I have a lot of knowledge in that area and different OSs there, but at the time, it's like, I could barely configure, in any other router because I just spent my whole career on those. And yeah, I could sort of fumble my way through a Palo Alto or something like that. And then in the early days, we would, emulate those kind of networks. And it's like, gosh, this is taking me forever. Like if I just want to do something like trace a packet, okay, I know where show MAC table is, show cam dynamic, so how do I do this on a Juniper? Oh, okay, let's go look that. Okay, well, what's the command on the Arista? Okay, let's go. It's like just the time it takes for all of that is insane. And yeah, that's what really kind of sold me. It's like I remember building these kind of static representations, in the past. And it's like, yeah, when I know everything and I know all the vendors, but even if you're, a single vendor like your Cisco, that's still 5 different OSs you're dealing with that you have to know, and they're all a little different.
Yeah, yeah. And if you work for a big company, I mean, you probably standardized on like a Cisco, like some network vendor. But
Sure.
hey, like every company I ever worked for, we were typically acquisition heavy, and we had other vendors in circulation for whatever reason. So it's like, okay, I'm not an expert at these things, but I have to touch them enough,
Right.
to where I've got to keep the lights on, do software upgrades and stuff, troubleshoot. But they're not most of the core network. They're side cases. So like having something to go through and actually make that easier in these platforms that I'm not touching every day, seems like it would be very useful.
It's remarkable to me how siloed we are in that way when we're all dealing with the same bit of data. If you're a security guy, you still care about forwarding through your firewall. You still care about the end-to-end destination. We have these sort of like, oh, that's that thing, I don't touch it. And then you start adding in the cloud teams. Oh, it's just a big bubble out there that I don't know what that is. You still have to care about where that thing goes to and what the destination happens to be. Now, maybe you want the data represented in a different way. Like, I heard the best analogy I heard, and this was actually from an incident response person, is like, network people are like the fire department, whereas security people are like the police department. Fire department's just concerned about getting things fixed, whereas the police are actually trying to investigate things. But they're the same pieces of data you're working with. You're working with the same incident response. You're working with the same sort of. So just because you need the data represented, maybe I don't care about what the path is. Maybe I care about what the blast radius of something is. Maybe I care about what the posture is. Maybe I'm literally looking more for vulnerabilities and things like that. It's all the same data that you're dealing with. It's just moving it around. And that's where I think this digital twin concept has really evolved. Like, most of us came from a networking background. It's like, okay, we can see what we can do for networking. And then as we start talking to different people that need all of this data, it's like, oh, that's really interesting. Why can't we just look at the data in a different way?
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So if I'm a big enterprise customer and I'm, taking that bird's eye view, I'm looking down at the bigger picture. What are the core technical components of having a digital twin? Like, what do I need to think about? What's involved? What teams? Like, how does it usually get to the point of evaluation to operationalizing the solution? What does that look like?
Well, I think this is where it gets interesting. Is I think we in this space and others in this space have figured out that the vendors really aren't going to step up to give us the data direct that we need. And I think this kind of reflects what we talked about at AutoCon back then too. Is the players in this space have figured out, okay, we're going to take what the vendors already have and use the exact same access that you do today. So, like I mentioned, when you're troubleshooting, trying to trace a MAC address, you're logging in, you're looking at you're looking at an IPv4 table. Okay, now let's look at the MAC table, see what ports them. A digital twin is going to do the exact same thing. It's either via, hopefully via an API. If not, it's going to have to screen scrape, which is ugly if they don't provide those sorts of APIs. And you look at those tables, you tell me what the output of a particular table is. You look at the ACL table, look at the input table, look at the NAT table, look at the overlay table, look at any, if there's any load balancers or VIPs, take all of those tables a packet will pass through and essentially run all those commands. So it winds up being about 20 or 25 different show commands, sometimes a little more. And if there's an API, that's great. And yeah, that's typically all you need to provide to any digital twin vendor is that read-only access that you're going to do, the same level of engineering access to those devices. For the cloud, it's really not that much different. They're just, of course, there's no show commands, but it's a set of APIs that do the same thing. So, tell me, give me the EC2 describe level APIs, give me transit level describe interfaces, describe gateways, look at the elastic load balancer sort of things, Azure, GCP, similar sort of things, same level of access you're doing. So that's really the key of the idea of a digital twin is it shouldn't be that thing that is making changes or even has a possibility to make changes to your network. It should be, just like it's safe to troubleshoot a network to log in and do show commands, a digital twin should be exactly the same level of safety.
Yeah, that's a great point. A great distinction of, read only and not, being able to adopt a digital twin or at least, plug it in and, get some intelligent data without the risk of messing your network up.
Yeah, and if there is a risk in doing show commands, you need to have a talk with your vendor, because that's not a great situation. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Run for the hills.
yeah.
So what are I know anytime big enterprise, they're adopting a new solution, it's always use case based, or what problem am I trying to solve, or
Sure.
what is the big thing, and there might be an impending date or something like that. So what are the main problems like a company is trying to solve when they set out looking for a digital twin solution?
I think it's pretty interesting because those have really evolved over the years. Like, most of us came from the networking background, as I said, and the most apparent solution that we saw was, okay, I can take a state of the network and compare that between different points in time and tell me, not just anyone can do the stare and compare and tell me what config has changed, but can I tell you everything that's changed from like a routing table? What if my provider changed routes on me? What new devices came online? But also, because I have sort of I can tell, a digital twin can tell you, can a particular path work or not? How does that change between change windows? Like, if I do a change, is the impact of my change, exactly what I meant it to be? And what I mean by that is, just because you kind of know what, I take these two interfaces, I shut them down, I change the route, it worked as intended. Like, I remember those days, those data center, you'd be on the phone, you do your changeover, you do a switchover, and you'd have 100 different application verifiers on the phone. Does SIP still work? Does the billing part still work? Does it, and they're all checking their sorts of things. And you hope they all made it, because it's like you got the all clear from the ones that are there. But then Monday morning rolls around and you missed one. This one out. And maybe you didn't even miss it, but maybe it was like, oh, well, it never worked before the change anyways. Like, it has nothing to do with the change that we did, but they decided. This is where a digital twin can give you that sort of, it's a term that we kind of coined, or we talk about internally, called mean time to innocence. I mean, everybody knows the network is always the problem. How can the network prove out that they are not the problem? Mathematically, if you can show that no, there is a path end to end, and here's exactly, here's every device that I hop through, and here's how it changed before and after. And then when I finish my change, if I've missed something, if something is not there, then I can say, well, yeah, this check has failed, and I can roll back, I can fix my problem. But you have that ability to see, it's not just crossing your fingers and the network looks good, but you missed an application. That's really the big one that we saw initially. But it's been interesting, because as this space has evolved some, you wind up getting things that aren't necessarily kind of that path level there. Like I mentioned, some of the security sort of things, looking at blast radius, but sometimes it's even just as simple as, what, I've got 9 different vendors on my network, and I have configurations that need to be standardized in some way. I've got SNMP strings need to be set, ACL strings need to be, but they all have a slightly different format. If you've ever done, you mentioned Ansible before, the hardest part about that particular job is writing those different connectors for every little vendor. It's like, okay, well, I have to make sure the connector for Juniper is right, and the one for Arista, so it's a slightly different CLI, and yeah. A digital twin has already done that job for you, just by necessity. We didn't set out to do that kind of thing, but by necessity, you have a normalized version of that, so you can query it on a vendor neutral basis. If I want to do something like, tell me which BGP peers I have that are, up but not active. Well, you've already parsed the BGP table. You just query that level of data. So yeah, like I said, starting out, it was like, okay, talk to network teams. These are the people that are. Turns out it's, and I sympathize with people still in operations. It's hard to tell people, oh, this saves me a whole lot of time, and it's hard to move that up to a financial level. But if you can cut out some of the outages that you have, because we've seen that some full on half of the outages that we see are not just around, oh, the change didn't work as I expect, but this did exactly what I thought it to, but I didn't know the full extent of my network. Once you get beyond just a few devices, it's an impossible for any team to except cross their fingers.
Yeah, I mean, some of those examples you gave me is kind of bringing back some.
Yeah, I saw you cringing over there. Yeah.
Yeah, like back to that 5K refresh I was talking about. Like part of that, like later, you fast forward a few weeks, and it was like, okay, now we're peeling off stuff from these FEX modules that are attached to the 5Ks, and
I'm sorry.
like. okay, like when these were set up originally, I mean, I wasn't there at the time at this company anyway, but let's not like multi-home to two different FEXs. We're going to have single points of failure for some things, but some things are going to be multi-homed, like it, and you're absolutely right. Monday rolls around and like half the stuff that you thought should work and was tested at the time as working didn't actually, there's problems. And then you're, doing everything that you can to prevent having to like actually roll back, the change.
Yeah. And so, I unfortunately think the network as a problem will never change. Whether it is cloud networking teams or we're the glue that holds everything together. It's always going to be that way. And up to this point, there hasn't been these kind of tools, and I mean, and a little on us too, really not the methodology for that. Software developers do unit tests for everything that they do. We don't have any version of that for networking, sad to say. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, absolutely right on that one. We're trying to get there.
We're trying.
It's an uphill battle. We might be climbing up Everest, and folks might be throwing down boulders as we try to climb, and we may not have a coat. But hey, we'll get there somehow.
Be one of those bodies that are still there decades later. Yeah, unfortunately,
frozen with a very confused look on my face. Right? How did I get here? Yeah. Oh, so.
But you'll be a landmark for future climbers, so that
exactly. So to the point of like unit testing and automation, do you see like organizations sort of integrating this digital twin idea, this digital twin technology tightly with their existing infrastructure as code and like pipeline management and processes? Like, okay, we run a low level environment through the digital twin, like a dev or a pre-prod. Sure. And then the main pipeline, gets run against production.
Yeah, absolutely. I see this. And the people I talk to in this, that are more on a, code pipeline mindset versus the manual change one, you can still get a lot of benefit if you're just using a twin to manually look at the states before and afterwards. But yeah, if you can automate this, if I pump it through an Ansible and use the same sort of APIs to give me a pass fail on those same sort of checks and then have that auto rollback, or even if you go a little farther on an infrastructure as code side, same kind of thing. Terraform has check modules already built in for everything. You just need to plug that in instead of, doing a ping or something. API call that to whatever your digital twin is and give you a pass fail. And then from that, maybe there's a human involved to remediate, or maybe there's an auto rollback for it. So yeah, this is absolutely what I see of organizations that are much farther on the automation journey, wherever they happen to be, can use this. And because it's still the same problem exists, whether you're automating or even infrastructure as code versus manual, you still don't really know the full impact of whatever change that you made.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I was actually in DC a week ago or 2 weeks ago for the VA NUG, and I was talking. I got to spend a lot of time with Scott Robon, just kind of talking about the current state of tech and what's next with automation forum and different things like that. And we sort of had this in a sense the same conversation, and it sort of led to that. Like, okay, like the screen scraping stuff it's been slowly phasing out, and you see the big box vendors like Juniper releasing Terraform providers for like Apstra.
Right. Yeah.
There's the bigger companies are like, okay, we're getting sort of left behind here. We need to have an API ecosystem. We need to integrate. We need to do these things, to make it easier for the customer to consume, because this is the way the customer wants to consume things now. So yeah, the integration between vendors, I think, is a very important thing, because if vendors don't talk and vendors don't integrate, or they don't expose an API in which there's a commonality in which they can be consumed by other things, I would say that it's not a bright future for that vendor.
Yeah, at least on a statement of intention, it seems to be getting a lot better on that front, where where you're not dealing with, or at least the talk isn't about using those same old, screen scraping and SNMP and sort of things. Now, unfortunately, I don't, in my prognostication, there's still too many people out there that that still, and there's still, back like when I was at a startup, when I was at Big Switch before, the number of people demanding, old things like SNMP. It's like, hey, there's this nice shiny API. No, we need SNMP and a CLI. So there are these dual kind of forces here that are really button up against each other. And I think we've, had this conversation at AutoCon several times with these, like, why is that the case? Okay, but I think the idea of having, whatever interface that you happen to write, you'll have to wind up supporting for it, which is where us as vendors have had such a hard time, because you do have to wind up supporting both kind of things. Having that API is great, but there's still someone with an old Cat 6K that's from 2012, and that's not getting updated. Yeah.
100%.
Or not just 100 of them. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, case in point, a lot of the time, if you're running like Iron in the data center, you've got your own gear, at least this has changed a lot actually over the past 5-10 years. But, when I first started doing networking, we'd have gear up for, like, I think the longest uptime I ever saw was with Cisco CSS load balancers and 6509s. Like, you turned them on and you never upgraded, never did anything. Like, you
didn't touch them.
Like, no. I saw CSS load balancers with, uptime of over, 10 years.
Oh yeah.
So, like, in production, which is crazy.
Yeah, you'd see stuff
that. That ship is hopefully sailed, and for the most part,
I think so. Yeah, I think there's been a point where it's, the speeds and feeds enough that they are forced to upgrade it at some point. Those 100 meg interfaces have got to go. So yeah,
100%. So, I don't like ever talking about anything these days unless I mention AI, because
of course
AI is the hottest thing around.
I think you have to. Yeah.
So is there an AI angle with the digital twin ecosystem? Anything to do with AI? Any integration? Any thoughts?
There absolutely is. Now, AI has, obviously been consuming now, if you think about how networks forward, though, they're remarkably deterministic. Like, that's unless something happens to change or reconverge, there really isn't, they're very static. Like I said, you have the packet come in, does a certain number of things, goes out, and that is the same no matter what. That's why a digital twin can be so complete and so mathematically accurate. Those levels of prediction of tell me interesting things about my network, that's where I think AI can have a play. And also giving you that level of, if those things sort of change on my network, because you'll never be able to fully model every vendor bug out there, every protocol, from a prediction standpoint. That's where I think AI has a real play. One, help me query this sort of network. And this is where I think it gets into, both of us are software developers. At least I'm on the amateur side. A lot of networking people aren't, and I think that's where AI can really help, because if you want to query the data in some way, whatever language it is, having some sort of AI engine to help me query that network data is going to really, really help there, but also help me sort of predict the effect of some changes. The panacea is, and every one of the digital twin providers out there, even on the open source side, is like, I want to be able to predict any change in my network. It's like, sure, that would be a panacea if you could predict everything that possibly happened on your network. That would be $1 billion company. I mean, that would just be insane. But you can get some level of confidence, and I think that's where AI can really play. Like, if I change these sort of BGP parameters, does that affect certain number of things? Does that move things around to some degree of confidence? But I find the most part, and this is just from a networking standpoint, I find for a lot of people it really helps is being able to, like, they know what they want out of the network, they know the data that they need to gather, but they don't know how to express it in the language that is there. And I think that's where AI really has that play for it.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, and I think I was talking to someone at some event, I don't know, last year, because I was at a lot of events. But
me too, yes.
This person was saying that they were, like, looking forward to the future to where AI would just manage the forwarding on the network and just always be switching constantly to the best thing. And I was thinking,
that sounds awful.
That sounds like a nightmare, just predicated on the idea of how networking works. Kind of like you were saying, like you want your network to be deterministic for various reasons. One of which is geography and things. Switching things up and having maybe a little bit of hallucination. And I know humans hallucinate all the time.
Yeah.
I do things where I'm like, why in the world did I do that? That was kind of dumb. But to say that AI, like getting to a point where it's not going to hallucinate, if we want it to be like more like us in these things, to be able to take the place of a human to actually make decisions on steering traffic a different direction, I don't think that should be the goal. First of all,
as someone who spent too many years in the SDN world, that was sort of the idea there, just using a controller and steering things via OpenFlow. And we would, use some data. It wasn't AI back then, but it would use some data to continually move around the traffic and move this flow to here and here. And there's a reason that did not materialize. And I mean, the versions of SDN that stuck around were ones like SD-WAN and wireless and things like that. But nobody really wants to do that in their core network and their data center, because you're exactly right. You need a level of determinism, and it doesn't need to change to that level, because that's a level of instability that's like, I hope you trust the system, because that was what makes it hard.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thanks for coming on.
Absolutely.
Is there anything you want to tell the audience, like how to get more engaged with community, or just kind of like some, parting advice?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can reach out to me at Twitter at Captain Packet, and it's also on YouTube, my same YouTube channel. But yeah, in terms of community, that's been the thing that I have really stepped up in the past year, as we mentioned before. So if you're local to Dallas, go to USNUA. You'll see the TXNUG postings. We'd love to have anyone out there. But yeah, if you're just in any sort of space here, whether it is, get on the Discord for Art of Network Engineering, get on, really start, just get on X and Twitter and start discussing something. It's been really the biggest boost in my career in the past 2 years. Even working for a vendor where you can't share everything in the world, obviously. But, I got into doing Terraform just a few years ago, and I've done several sessions on it. Just been going out there and having a speaking session. So I would absolutely, and even if you're not ready for that, just go out and attend them. We're always looking for, every one of us, you as well, looking for new speakers and new people in this space. So community's been the most important part of this. And I wish that would have existed, when I was coming up in the ranks, because it really didn't. I mean, there were a handful of vendor level meetups, but it was like, okay, here's how Cisco tells you to do things, and it's some TME that comes on and gives you some present, which is fine. Don't get me wrong, but it's not community. It's like, so
yeah,
it's nice for us as vendors to go out there and not be the vendor and just talk tech and just talk some interesting piece of tech, whether it's, I did one on EVNG a few months ago. I did one on, just because I still love setting up networks and still love configuring things, like we've said before, going back to this. So whatever you're interested in learning and passionate about, I think is really great. And so people are on the AI front, people are doing some really cool things on AI. I've seen John Capobianco's posts and stuff, like some really cool stuff that I really like.
Awesome. Yeah, great advice. And yeah, everybody listening, get involved with the community. That's a growth hack for your career. Rising tide raises all ships. You learn more, and you can, it's good to help others, that aren't where you're at, learn more as well, and, bring them along with you, because we're all on the same ship. We're all trying to go the same direction, and you're going to have stragglers, and you want to pull them in the boat with you. And, let's do this together. Awesome. Thank you so much, Craig, for coming on.